The axe sang against the whetstone in a rhythm that did not belong to Varian Brennan. And when he pushed open the shed door with dawn mist still clinging to his boots, he found her there like a ghost made flesh, an orc girl with skin the color of summer moss, crouched over his grandfather's splitting axe, working the blade with hands that knew their business. She did not startle at his entrance. Her amber eyes flicked up to meet his, held his gaze for 3 heartbeats, then returned to the axe as if his presence changed nothing. The whetstone continued its arc along the blade, methodical and sure, and Varian stood frozen in the doorway with his pulse hammering in his throat, because orcs did not simply appear in sheds, and they certainly did not sharpen axes for human farmers at the edge of the Thornwood territories. "That is my axe," he said, and immediately felt foolish because of course she knew whose axe it was, sitting in his shed on his land, 2 miles from the nearest neighbor. "It was dull," she replied, her voice low and rough-edged like wind through pine needles. "Dangerously so. You would have split your own foot before you split another log." She wore leather breeches that had seen hard use and a vest that left her muscled arms bare despite the autumn chill. Her black hair hung in a thick braid over one shoulder, and when she shifted her weight, Varian caught sight of dried blood on her side, seeping through a makeshift bandage that looked like torn cloth bound with twine. "You are bleeding," he said. "Yes, in my shed." "Yes. Why?" She set down the whetstone and lifted the axe, testing its edge with her thumb. Apparently satisfied, she placed it carefully against the wall before meeting his eyes again. "Because your shed was unlocked, your house was not, and I needed somewhere to rest before I bled out entirely." The axe was there. "I do not like being idle." Varian should have been afraid. Every story he had grown up with painted orcs as monsters who raided human settlements, who killed without mercy, who wore the bones of their enemies as trophies. But this orc girl sat in his shed sharpening his tools, and the only thing she seemed interested in killing was her own boredom while she waited to see if she would survive her wound. "How bad is it?" he asked, nodding toward her side. "Bad enough that I stopped running. Not so bad that I am dead." "That is not an answer." "It is the only answer I have." She shifted again, and this time he saw her wince, saw the way her jaw tightened and her fingers curled into fists. "I will leave when I can walk without my insides following me out. I did not mean to bring trouble to your door." Varian looked at her, really looked at her, and saw exhaustion written in every line of her body. Saw the way her shoulders sagged when she thought he was not watching, the way her breathing came shallow and careful. Saw that she was young, probably close to his own 23 years, and that whatever had put that wound in her side had scared her badly enough to seek shelter in the shed of a human stranger. "Can you walk to the house?" he asked, her eyes narrowed. "Why?" "Because I have clean bandages in the house and hot water, and if you are going to bleed to death, I would prefer it not happen in my shed. The wood would stain." She stared at him like he had just offered her a snake instead of help. "You would bring an orc into your home." "I would bring an injured person into my home. Can you walk or not?" For a long moment she said nothing, and Varian wondered if she would refuse, if pride or suspicion would keep her bleeding in his shed until infection or blood loss claimed her. Then she braced one hand against the wall and pushed herself upright with a grunt of pain that she tried and failed to suppress. "I can walk," she said through gritted teeth. She made it 3 steps before her legs buckled. Varian caught her before she hit the ground, and she was heavier than he expected, solid muscle and dense bone. But he had spent 6 years working this farm, and his body knew how to bear weight. She did not fight him when he adjusted his grip, just breathed hard against his shoulder and let him take her weight as he half carried her across the yard to his house. Inside, he settled her into the chair by the hearth, and went to stoke the fire back to life. She watched him with wary eyes, and he could see her calculating distances, marking exits, preparing to run or fight despite the blood still seeping down her side. "What is your name?" he asked as he filled a pot with water and hung it over the fire. "Why do you want to know?" "Because I am about to see you half naked while I tend your wound, and it seems polite to know what to call you." Her mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Grisha. Varian." He pulled out his medical supplies, such as they were clean cloth, needle and thread, a bottle of strong spirits for sterilizing. "What happened to you, Grisha?" "I ran from my clan." The simple honesty of it surprised him. He had expected evasion, half-truths, the kind of careful non-answers she had given in the shed. Instead, she met his gaze steadily and gave him truth that could get her killed if he chose to share it with the wrong people. "Why?" "Because they wanted me to kill someone I did not want to kill, and when I refused, they said I was no longer one of them." She touched her side carefully. "One of my former brothers decided to make the exile permanent." Varian brought the supplies over to her chair, along with a cup of water. "Drink this first. Then we will see about keeping you alive." She drank without argument, and when she had drained the cup, she began unlacing her vest with fingers that shook only slightly. He helped her peel away the leather and the blood-soaked shirt beneath, and when he saw the wound he had to suppress a sharp intake of breath. A knife wound, long and vicious, angling up under her ribs. Deep enough to be serious, not quite deep enough to have killed her outright. The edges were inflamed and the flesh around it was hot to the touch. "This needs to be cleaned and stitched," he said. "It is going to hurt. Everything hurts already. More will not make much difference." He cleaned the wound with the spirits, and she did not make a sound, though her knuckles went white where they gripped the arms of the chair. He worked as quickly as he could, stitching the wound closed with neat, careful sutures the way his mother had taught him before the fever took her 5 winters past. Grisha watched the ceiling and breathed through her teeth, and did not complain even when he pulled the stitches tight. When he finished, he bound her ribs with clean cloth and stepped back to examine his work. "You should rest. The infection is not bad yet, but you need to keep the wound clean and stay still for a few days." "I cannot stay here for days." "Why not?" "Because I am an orc in a human farmhouse. And when your neighbors find out, they will come with torches and pitchforks to burn out the monster." Varian sat back on his heels and looked at her. This orc girl who had sharpened his axe while bleeding, who had answered his questions with unflinching honesty, who sat in his chair and expected him to turn on her at any moment. "My nearest neighbor is Thomas Valdez, and he is 2 miles east. He minds his own business and expects the same from others. Beyond him is old Margaret Preston, who could not walk 2 miles if her life depended on it. Beyond her is nothing but thornwood for 50 miles. If you stay quiet and I keep my mouth shut, no one will know you are here." "Why would you do this?" "Because you are hurt, and I am not going to throw an injured person out to die just because you have green skin and tusks." He stood and moved to the kitchen, suddenly needing something to do with his hands. "Are you hungry?" She blinked at the change of subject, then nodded slowly. "Yes." He made porridge with dried apples and honey, the same breakfast he ate most mornings, and brought her a bowl. She ate like someone who had not had a proper meal in days, and he tried not to stare at the way her tusks caught on the spoon, the way she had to angle her head slightly to eat comfortably. When she finished, her eyelids were drooping. The warmth of the fire and the food in her belly and the pain of her wound were conspiring to drag her under. "There is a bed upstairs," he said. "You should sleep. I cannot climb stairs. Then you can have my bed down here." He nodded to the small room off the kitchen, the one he had moved into after his mother died because he could not bear to sleep in her room upstairs. "I will take the loft." She looked like she wanted to argue, but exhaustion won. He helped her to the bed, and she collapsed onto it with a sigh that sounded like surrender. Within minutes, her breathing had evened out into sleep. Varian stood in the doorway and watched her for a moment, this stranger who had arrived with dawn, and wondered what he had just gotten himself into. The next 2 days passed in a strange, suspended quiet. Grisha slept most of the first day, waking only to drink water and eat the broth Varian brought her. On the second day she was more alert, and he caught her watching him with those amber eyes whenever he moved through the house. He went about his daily work feeding the chickens, checking the fence line, splitting wood for winter, but he found himself hurrying back to the house more often than usual, checking to make sure she had not worsened, that the fever had not set in, that she had not tried to leave before she was healed. On the third day he came inside at noon to find her standing by the window, one hand pressed to her bandaged ribs, looking out at his small farm with an expression he could not read. "You should be resting," he said. "I have been resting. I am going mad with it." She turned to face him. "Let me help with something, anything. You are recovering from a stab wound. I am Orc. We heal quickly." She moved away from the window and he saw that she was walking better, the stiffness gone from her movements. "I have been useless for 3 days. It sits poorly with me." Varian considered this. He had work that needed doing, always did on a farm, and he had been putting off some of the heavier tasks because they were easier with 2 sets of hands. "I need to move hay bales into the barn before the weather turns. But if you tear your stitches, I am not fixing them again." Something that might have been a smile crossed her face. Understood. They worked together in the afternoon sun, moving the heavy bales from where they had been drying in the upper field down to the barn. Grisha was strong, stronger than any human woman Varian had ever met, and even injured she could lift more than he could. But he watched her carefully, and when he saw her breathing grow labored, he called a halt. "That is enough for today." She looked like she wanted to argue, but instead she just nodded and followed him back to the house. He made dinner, roasted chicken and root vegetables, and they ate in companionable silence. "Why do you live alone?" she asked eventually. "My mother died 5 years ago. My father before I was born. This farm is all I have left of them. No wife, no children, no." He did not mention that most of the unmarried women in the region had moved to the larger towns, seeking easier lives than a frontier farm could provide. Did not mention the loneliness that sometimes sat so heavy on his chest he could barely breathe. "What about your clan? Will they come looking for you?" Her expression darkened. "No, I am dead to them. That is how exile works among my people. I no longer exist. You have family." "I had a brother. He was the one who put the knife in me." She said it flatly, without emotion, but Varian saw the pain that flickered behind her eyes. "My mother died in a raid when I was young. My father leads the clan. He was the one who gave the order for my death when I refused his command." Varian set down his fork, his appetite suddenly gone. "What did he want you to do?" "There is a human settlement 3 days north of here. Small, maybe 30 people. They have done nothing to us, pose no threat. But my father believes that humans are the enemy that we must strike first or be destroyed. He ordered a raid. I said it was murder, not war. He said I was a coward and a traitor." She met his eyes. He was not entirely wrong. "About which part? I am a coward. I should have fought harder. Should have convinced the others. Instead I ran. You chose not to kill innocent people. That is not cowardice. Is it not? I left them to die anyway. My refusal changed nothing except that I am no longer there to bear witness." Varian reached across the table and touched her hand, just briefly. "You cannot save everyone. You can only choose what kind of person you want to be. She looked down at where his hand had been, as if the brief contact had burned her. And what kind of person are you, Varian Brennan, who takes in wounded orcs and feeds them at his own table? The kind who believes that people are more than the stories told about them. They sat in silence for a long moment, and Varian felt something shift between them. Some understanding reached without words. Over the following days, Grisha grew stronger. She began helping with more of the daily work, and Varian found himself looking forward to her company in a way that surprised him. She was direct in a way human women often were not, saying exactly what she meant without artifice or game playing. She was quick to laugh when something amused her, her whole face transforming with genuine joy. And she was competent in ways that made his life easier. She knew how to fix a fence so it would hold through winter, how to read the sky for coming weather, how to move through the woods without disturbing the game. They fell into a rhythm, working together during the day, sharing meals at his small table, talking late into the evening by the fire. He learned that she loved music, but had no voice for singing, that she could track a deer for miles without losing the trail, that she was afraid of deep water because she had nearly drowned as a child. She learned that he had wanted to be a scholar before his mother's illness tied him to the farm, that he still read every book he could get his hands on, that he sometimes woke in the night from dreams he could not remember, but that left him aching with loneliness. 3 weeks after she had first appeared in his shed, Varian woke before dawn to find her missing from the house. He checked the barn, the shed, the chicken coop, his heart pounding with irrational fear. Finally, he found her sitting on the fence rail at the edge of his property, looking out toward the thornwood with dawn breaking gold and pink behind the trees. "I thought you had left," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I thought about it." She did not look at him. "I am healed enough now to travel. I could be 10 miles away by noon." "Why are you not?" "Because I do not want to go." She turned to face him then, and in the early light he could see the vulnerability in her expression. "I like it here. I like the work. I like the quiet. I like that you do not look at me and see a monster." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I like you." Varian climbed up to sit beside her on the fence, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "I like you too. This is dangerous, for both of us." "I know. If your people find out you are harboring an orc, I know. If my people find out I am living with a human, I know, Grisha." He turned to look at her and found her already watching him. "I know all of it, and I do not care. You should care, I should care." But she did not move away, and when he reached out to take her hand, she laced her fingers through his and held on tight. They sat like that as the sun rose, holding hands on the fence rail, and Varian felt something in his chest expand until he thought it might burst. He had been alone for so long, had convinced himself that he preferred it that way, that the farm and his books and his simple routine were enough. But having Grisha here had shown him what he had been missing, had illuminated all the empty spaces in his life he had been ignoring. "Stay," he said. "Please stay." "For how long?" "As long as you want." She squeezed his hand, and he saw tears glinting in her eyes, though she blinked them away quickly. "I want forever, but I will settle for as long as we can manage." That evening, she moved her few belongings from his room to the one upstairs, claiming she had been monopolizing his space for long enough. He did not argue, though he found he missed having her close by, missed hearing her breathing in the next room. Autumn deepened into winter. They worked to prepare the farm for the cold months ahead, and Varian taught Grisha to read by firelight in the evenings. She was a quick study, sounding out words with fierce concentration, and the first time she read an entire sentence without his help, she looked so proud that he wanted to kiss her. He did not. They existed in a careful balance. Neither pushing for more than the other was ready to give, but the tension built between them like a drawn bowstring. The first snow came in late November, and with it came Thomas Valdez riding up to the house with a haunch of venison and an invitation to the midwinter gathering the scattered homesteaders held every year. Varian stepped out to meet him before he could dismount, before he could get close enough to the house to see inside. "Thomas, good to see you. And you, Varian." Thomas was 60 if he was a day, weathered and solid as old oak. "Brought you some deer. Took 3 this season, more than my wife and I can eat. Figured you could use the meat. I appreciate it." Varian took the wrapped venison and tried not to look nervous. "How is Martha?" "Cantankerous as ever. She sent me to make sure you are coming to the gathering. Says you missed the last 2 years, and it is not healthy for a young man to spend all his time alone. I have been busy with the farm." "You are always busy with the farm. Come anyway. There will be food and music and company. Maybe you will meet a nice girl." Thomas grinned. "Martha has her eye on the Miller girl for you. Pretty thing, just moved back from Crestfall." "I will think about it," Varian said, knowing he could not go, could never go as long as Grisha was here. Thomas studied him for a moment with sharp eyes that missed little. "You all right, son?" "You seem jumpy." "Just tired. It has been a long season." "Well, rest up then. Gathering is in 3 weeks. I will hold you to that thinking about it." He tipped his hat and turned his horse. "Stay warm, Varian." Varian watched him ride away and felt his stomach twist with guilt and fear and frustration. He stood there until Thomas disappeared over the ridge, then carried the venison inside. Grisha was sitting at the table, and from the look on her face, she had heard every word through the window. "You have to go," she said. "No. If you keep refusing, they will get suspicious. They will come to check on you. I will tell them I am sick, and they will come to help you because that is what neighbors do." She stood and crossed to him, taking the venison and setting it aside. "I can hide when they come. I can stay in the woods for a day or 2. You need to maintain your connections to your community. I do not want to go meet some girl Martha has picked out for me." "Why not?" He stared at her. "Are you serious? You are human. I am orc. You should have a human wife, human children, a normal life." "I do not want normal, I want you." The words hung between them, too raw, too honest. Grisha's eyes went wide and her mouth opened, but no sound came out. "I am sorry," Varian said quickly. "I should not have said that. I know this is complicated and dangerous and probably impossible, but I cannot pretend anymore that you are just someone staying here temporarily. You are not. You are." He stopped, struggling for words. "You are the person I want to come home to. The person I want to eat dinner with and argue with about whether the roof needs patching and teach to read and just exist with. And I do not know what to do with that, except say it and hope you do not run away." Grisha stepped forward and cupped his face in her hands. Her palms were rough with calluses but impossibly gentle. "I am not running anywhere. I am exactly where I want to be." She kissed him then, and it was clumsy because of her tusks, and because neither of them knew how to navigate this, but it was also perfect. He wrapped his arms around her and pulled her close and kissed her like he had been wanting to for weeks, and she made a sound in her throat that was half growl, half sigh. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she rested her forehead against his. "This is going to be difficult," she murmured. "I know. We will have to hide, lie to people you have known your whole life. I know. And still it might not be enough. They might find out. They might come for me for you. I know, Grisha, I know all of it." He pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. "And I am choosing you anyway." She kissed him again, softer this time, and he felt her smile against his mouth. "Then I suppose we had better figure out how to make this work." They went to bed together that night, and Varian discovered that every story he had heard about orcs being brutal and savage was as much a lie as everything else. Grisha was careful with him, almost reverent, and when she touched him, it was with a tenderness that made his chest ache. Afterward they lay tangled together in his bed, her head on his chest, and he ran his fingers through her unbound hair and thought that he had never been this happy. "I love you," he whispered into the darkness. She tensed for a moment, then relaxed against him. "I love you too." "Even though I know better," he laughed softly. "We are a pair of fools, the very worst kind." Winter settled in around them. Varian went to the gathering and made appropriate noises about the Miller girl, and Martha Valdez beamed and promised to arrange an introduction in the spring. He felt like a liar and a fraud, but he smiled and ate venison stew and played cards with Thomas and the other men. And when he finally rode home through the snow, Grisha was waiting for him. She had kept the fire going and made bread and heated water for washing, and when he came through the door she crossed to him and kissed him like he had been gone for weeks instead of hours. "How was it?" she asked, boring. "Lonely." He pulled her close. "All I wanted was to be here with you. You have me now." They made love by the fire that night, and Varian thought that this was worth any risk, any cost. To have this, to have her, was worth everything. The winter passed in a cocoon of contentment. They were snowed in more often than not, and the isolation that had once felt oppressive now felt like a blessing. They had nowhere to be except with each other, nothing to do except the daily work of survival and the nightly work of love. Grisha continued learning to read, and Varian gave her his favorite books one at a time, watching with delight as she discovered stories and ideas she had never known existed. She told him stories of her own people in return, tales of great warriors and cunning hunters, of the spirits that lived in the deep woods and the old magic that still sang in certain stones. "You miss it?" he asked one night as they lay in bed. "Your clan, your people." "I miss my brother. The one who was my brother before he became my father's creature. I miss what we were as children." She was quiet for a moment. "But no, I do not miss the clan. I am more myself here with you than I ever was with them. Do you think you could be happy, living like this, just the two of us?" "I am happy right now. Tomorrow can worry about itself." But tomorrow came anyway, and with it came trouble. It was early March, the snow beginning to melt, when Varian went out to check the trap line and found tracks in the mud near the tree line. Boot prints, too large for human feet. Orc tracks and fresh. He followed them for 100 yards, far enough to confirm they circled the property, someone scouting, observing. Then he ran back to the house. Grisha took one look at his face and went still. What happened? Orc tracks, all around the farm. Someone was watching. Her face went pale beneath her green skin. "How many?" "I only found one set of prints, but that does not mean there was only one." She was already moving, gathering her few belongings, strapping on the knife he had given her to replace the one she had lost. "I have to go. If they have found me, they will come back. You need to be able to say I was never here, that you know nothing." "No." Varian caught her arm. "We do not know it was your clan. It could be travelers, traders. Traveling orcs do not scout human farms in secret. It was a warrior, and if they report back that they saw me here," she stopped, her breath catching. "My father will come. He will kill you for harboring me. He will kill me for the dishonor I have brought on the clan. We are both dead if I stay. Then we leave together. Where would we go? There is nowhere in this world where a human and an orc can live openly together. Then we will live in secret somewhere else. The frontier is huge, Grisha. There are places so remote that no one would ever find us." She cupped his face in her hands, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I will not let you give up everything you have for me. This farm is your inheritance, your family legacy. It is just land, just a house. You are what matters." They argued back and forth as the sun set, neither willing to give ground. Finally, Grisha agreed to stay one more night, and they would scout in the morning, try to determine who had been watching and whether they had gone or would return. Varian barely slept. He held Grisha close and listened to every creak of the house, every whisper of wind outside, expecting at any moment to hear the sound of warriors descending on them. Dawn came gray and cold. They ate a quick breakfast and went out together to search for more tracks. What they found made Varian's blood run cold. More prints, multiple sets this time, all converging on the house during the night. They had been surrounded while they slept, and only the fact that the scouts had apparently been ordered to observe rather than attack had saved them. "We have to go now," Grisha said, her voice tight. "They will be back tonight with more warriors. We have hours at most." They threw together what supplies they could carry: food, blankets, weapons, flint and steel. Varian took one last look at the house his grandfather had built, the land his mother had loved, and felt something break inside him. But when he looked at Grisha, saw the fear and determination in her eyes, he knew he was making the right choice. They struck out south, away from the thornwood, toward the wild lands where maps ran out and only trappers and explorers ventured. The going was hard, the late winter terrain treacherous with half-frozen mud and hidden ice. But they pushed on, putting as much distance as they could between themselves and the farm before nightfall. They made camp in a small cave, barely more than an overhang really, and ate cold rations because they did not dare light a fire. Grisha sat with her back to the stone, staring out into the darkness with a hunter's vigilance. "I am sorry," she said quietly. "I have ruined your life." "You have not ruined anything. You have given me a reason to care about living. Pretty words, but you have lost your home." "Home is not a place." He moved to sit beside her, taking her hand. "I learned that this winter. Home is wherever you are." She turned to look at him, and in the faint moonlight he could see tears tracking down her cheeks. "I do not deserve you. That is my line." She laughed wetly and kissed him, and they held each other while the night grew deeper around them. They traveled for 3 days, moving steadily south and west. On the 4th day they crested a ridge and found themselves looking down into a valley Varian had never seen before, never even heard of. A river ran through it, silver in the afternoon sun, and the land was green and lush despite the season. "It is beautiful," Grisha breathed. "It is remote." Varian studied the valley with a farmer's eye. "Good water, good soil. We could build something here. You think we are far enough away?" "I think we are off the edge of the map. If they are still following us, they are more determined than I gave them credit for." They descended into the valley and found a spot where the river bent, creating a natural clearing surrounded by forest. It was defensible, private, and had everything they would need to survive. "We could start here," Varian said. "Build a cabin, plant a garden come spring. It would not be easy, but we could do it." Grisha turned in a slow circle, taking in the land, the river, the mountains rising in the distance. When she looked at him again, her expression was full of cautious hope. "You really want this? A life in the wilderness, always looking over our shoulders? I want you. Everything else is details." She kissed him then, hard and desperate and full of promise. "Then let us build something that lasts." They spent the next weeks constructing a small cabin from logs they felled and stones they pulled from the river. It was hard work, harder than anything Varian had done even on the farm, but Grisha worked beside him with tireless strength, and slowly the structure took shape. They chinked the gaps with moss and mud, built a stone hearth, fashioned a door from split logs. It was crude compared to the house Varian had grown up in, but it was theirs, built with their own hands, and when they finally slept under its roof for the first time, Varian felt a bone-deep satisfaction he had not expected. Spring came to the valley in a rush of green growth and birdsong. They planted a garden with seeds Varian had thought to grab before they fled: potatoes, beans, squash, carrots. They set snares and fished the river and slowly built up stores of food and supplies. They also built defenses. Grisha taught Varian to think like a warrior, to watch for signs of intrusion, to set alarms and traps around their perimeter. They always had weapons within reach, always had an escape route planned. But as the weeks turned to months and no one came, they began to relax slightly. Began to believe they might actually be safe here. One warm evening in late spring, Varian was fishing at the river when Grisha came to sit beside him. She had been acting strange all day, nervous and preoccupied, and he had been giving her space to work through whatever was bothering her. "I need to tell you something," she said. His stomach dropped. "What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong. At least I do not think so, but it is going to change things." She took a breath. "I am pregnant." Varian's fishing pole slipped from his nerveless fingers and tumbled into the water. He stared at her, his mind completely blank. "Say something," Grisha whispered. "Are you certain?" "Yes. I have suspected for a few weeks, but now I am sure." "How is that possible?" "I mean, I know how, but we are different species. Apparently not different enough." She was watching him with anxious eyes. "Are you angry?" "Angry? No. I am." He struggled to find words for the enormous, complicated tangle of emotions flooding through him. "I am terrified and thrilled and completely unprepared, but not angry. Never angry. It will be harder. Raising a child out here. Everything is harder out here. We have managed so far." He reached out to touch her stomach, still flat beneath her shirt. "We will manage this too." She covered his hand with hers, and he saw relief wash over her features. "I was afraid you would not want this. I want everything with you, even the impossible things." They held each other as the sun set over the valley, and Varian felt the future reshaping itself around this new reality. They would have to be even more careful now, would have to build more, prepare more, think not just about their own survival but about the tiny life growing between them. But they would do it. Together. The summer was busy with preparation. They expanded the cabin, adding a second room. They hunted and fished and preserved as much food as they could. Grisha taught Varian to speak some of the orc language, so their child could know both halves of their heritage. Varian read to her from his few books, telling stories of heroes and far-off lands, building dreams in words. Grisha's pregnancy progressed without complication. She remained strong and healthy, working alongside him until the very end. She complained about her swollen feet and her aching back, but she never complained about the baby, and Varian would often catch her with her hand on her stomach, a soft smile on her face. They chose names together. If it was a boy, Vincent. If it was a girl, Mara. Simple names that could belong to either human or orc. In late autumn, as the leaves turned gold and the air grew crisp, Grisha went into labor. Varian had read everything he could find about childbirth, had tried to prepare himself, but nothing could have prepared him for the reality of it. The hours stretched endlessly, and he felt utterly helpless as Grisha labored to bring their child into the world. But she was strong, stronger than anyone he had ever known, and when dawn broke over the valley, their daughter was born. Mara came into the world with a lusty cry that echoed off the mountains. She had green-tinged skin lighter than her mother's, tiny tusks just barely visible, and her father's brown eyes. She was perfect and impossible and entirely theirs. Varian held her for the first time with shaking hands, this tiny creature who was half of him and half of the woman he loved, and felt something shift fundamentally in his understanding of the world. This was what mattered, not land or houses or what people thought. this small, squalling baby who existed because he and Grisha had refused to let the world tell them their love was wrong. "Hello, Mara," he whispered. "Welcome to your valley." Grisha watched them both with exhausted, tear-bright eyes. "She is beautiful. She is everything." The first year of Mara's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights and constant worry and profound joy. She grew quickly, as orc children did, and by her first birthday she was already toddling around the cabin with determined steps and getting into everything. She had her mother's stubbornness and her father's curiosity, and she kept them both constantly on their toes. But watching her explore their valley with wonder in her eyes, hearing her first words mama and dada and river and bird made every sleepless night worth it. They had been in the valley for nearly 2 years when the strangers appeared. Varian was in the garden when he heard Mara shriek, not in pain but in surprise. He dropped his hoe and ran toward the cabin, his heart hammering, and found Grisha standing in front of their daughter with a knife in her hand, and 3 figures emerging from the forest. 2 orcs and a human woman, all armed but with their weapons sheathed. They stopped at the clearing's edge, hands held out in a gesture of peace. "We mean no harm," the human woman called. "We saw your smoke and hoped for shelter. We have been traveling for days." "This land is claimed," Grisha said, her voice hard. "We can see that. We are not here to challenge your claim, just asking for a night by your fire and water from your river. We will be gone at first light." Varian moved to stand beside Grisha, and one of the orcs tilted his head, studying them both with keen interest. "A human and an orc," he said slowly. "And a child. I had heard rumors, but I did not believe them." "What rumors?" Varian asked, keeping his voice steady. "That there are places in the wilderness where the old divides do not matter, where humans and orcs live in peace." The orc smiled, and it was not threatening. "We have been searching for such places." "Why?" The human woman stepped forward. "Because we are like you. I am Maggie, and this is my partner Drek and his cousin Norak. We have been living in secret for 3 years, but our settlement was discovered. We barely escaped with our lives." Varian and Grisha exchanged glances. Slowly, Grisha lowered her knife. "One night," she said, "but if you give us any reason to doubt you, you will not see dawn. Understood?" They were cautious that night, keeping Mara close and taking turns sleeping, but the strangers proved to be what they claimed. Over dinner, they shared their story. Maggie and Drek had met when she saved his life after a hunting accident, and they had fallen in love despite knowing it was forbidden. Norak had been exiled for defending their relationship. "We have been traveling for months," Maggie said, "looking for somewhere remote enough that we could survive. When we saw your valley, we thought perhaps you might know of other places like it." "This is the only place we know," Varian admitted, "but the valley is large. There is room for more than just us." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Grisha looked at him sharply, but she did not contradict him. Drek leaned forward. "You would be willing to share this place?" "If you are willing to work for your share of it. We could use help building defenses, expanding the gardens, and there is safety in numbers." They talked long into the night, and by the time the fire burned low, an agreement had been reached. Maggie, Drek, and Norak would stay, would help build a community in this hidden valley. More came over the following year. A pair of human brothers whose youngest had fallen in love with an orc woman. An elderly orc who had been healer to a human village and been forced to flee when war came. A young couple, barely more than children, who had run away rather than be separated. The valley settlement grew slowly, organically, each new arrival vetted carefully and accepted only after proving their commitment to peace. They built more cabins, expanded the gardens, established hunting grounds and gathering areas. They created a place where human and orc children played together without fear, where mixed families could exist openly. It was not perfect. There were disagreements, misunderstandings, moments of tension when old prejudices flared. But they worked through it together, building something new from the rubble of old hatreds. Mara grew up surrounded by this community, learning both human and orc languages, playing with children who looked like her and children who did not. She knew she was different, but different did not mean alone. When she was 5, Grisha became pregnant again. Their son Vincent was born in late winter, and he had his mother's amber eyes and his father's brown hair. The whole settlement celebrated his birth, and Varian held his son and looked around at the community they had built and felt overwhelming gratitude. 7 years after they had fled into the wilderness, Varian stood on the ridge overlooking the valley and watched smoke rising from 24 chimneys. Children's laughter echoed up from the river where the young ones were fishing under watchful eyes. In the central clearing, humans and orcs worked side by side building a communal hall for gatherings and celebrations. He felt Grisha come to stand beside him, her hand slipping into his. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "That I never could have imagined this, any of it. Are you happy?" He turned to look at her, this woman who had appeared in his shed one dawn morning and changed everything. She was older now, her face lined with laughter and worry in equal measure, her hair shot through with gray. She was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "I am happy," he said simply. Below them, Mara and Vincent were helping carry water from the river, their voices raised in some argument that would be forgotten within the hour. Around them, the community went about its daily work, each person proof that love could bridge any divide if given the chance. "We built something good here," Grisha said softly. "We did. Do you ever regret it? Giving up your farm, your old life?" Varian thought about the question, really considered it. He thought about his grandfather's house, his mother's grave, the life he might have lived if Grisha had never stumbled wounded into his shed. It seemed impossibly distant now, like something that had happened to someone else. "No," he said finally. "I regret nothing." She leaned her head on his shoulder, and they stood together watching the sun set over the valley they had claimed, the home they had built, the future they had made possible through sheer, stubborn love. In the spring, the settlement council decided to build a school. They wanted their children to know how to read and write, to understand the world beyond their hidden valley, to be prepared for the day when they might venture out into it. Varian volunteered to be the teacher. He had books now, traded for with passing trappers, and he had the patience to work with the children who came to him with eager minds and endless questions. He taught them to read using the same techniques he had used with Grisha all those years ago. He taught them mathematics and history and geography. He taught them that knowledge was power, and that understanding was the antidote to fear. Mara was one of his best students, quick and clever and always pushing for more. Vincent was younger but no less bright, asking questions that made Varian think carefully about his answers. One evening after lessons, Mara lingered behind while the other children ran off to play. "Papa," she said, and Varian looked up from the slates he was organizing. "The other children ask me sometimes why I look different from them. What do you tell them?" "That I am both, human and orc, but some of them say that is not possible, that you have to be one or the other." Varian set aside his work and crouched down to her level. "Do you feel like you have to be one or the other?" She considered this seriously. "No, I feel like I am me." "Then that is your answer. You do not have to be what other people think you should be. You just have to be yourself." "Is that what you and Mama did? Just decided to be yourselves?" "Something like that. Your mother and I decided that what we felt for each other was more important than what anyone else thought about it." Mara nodded slowly, processing this. Then she smiled, bright and certain. I am glad you decided that. Otherwise I would not be here. Neither would I, Varian said softly. Not the person I am now, anyway. She hugged him and ran off to join the other children, and Varian watched her go with his heart full. The years continued to pass, marked by the rhythm of seasons and the growth of children. The settlement prospered. They established trade routes with a few select trappers and traders who proved trustworthy, exchanging furs and preserved meat for tools and goods they could not make themselves. A few times, travelers brought news of the outside world. Wars between human and orc kingdoms. Treaties signed and broken. Raids and retaliations that spiraled into bloodshed. Each time, the settlement members would gather to discuss whether they needed to increase their defenses, whether they should move deeper into the wilderness. But their valley remained hidden, protected by the mountains and the wilderness and the careful vigilance of its inhabitants. They were a secret, a rumor, a place that might exist only in wishful thinking. When Varian was 45 and Grisha 43, they sat together on the porch of their expanded cabin and watched the sunset paint the valley gold and orange. "You think it will last?" Grisha asked quietly. "After we are gone?" "Yes," Varian said with certainty. "Look at them." He gestured to where a group of teenagers were gathered by the river, a mix of humans and orcs and those who were both. "They have never known a world where this was impossible. They will fight to keep it. I hope you are right. I am right. We built the foundation. They will build the future." She squeezed his hand. "I love you, you know. After all these years, I still wake up sometimes surprised that you are real. The feeling is mutual." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge overhead. And Varian thought about the morning he had walked into his shed and found an orc girl sharpening his axe like she belonged there. He thought about all the moments that had followed the terror and the joy, the struggle and the triumph, the daily work of building a life together against all odds. He thought about Mara, now 17 and teaching the younger children. About Vincent, 12 and already showing signs of becoming a gifted craftsman. About the community that had grown around them, proof that change was possible if people were willing to risk everything for it. In the settlement below, lanterns were being lit as families gathered for evening meals. Laughter drifted up on the breeze, along with the smell of cooking and the sound of a flute someone had begun to play. This was home. Not the farm he had been born on, not the house his grandfather built, but this valley, these people, this life he and Grisha had carved out of wilderness and hope. "Thank you," he said suddenly. "For what? For sharpening my axe that morning, for staying, for choosing me." Grisha laughed, the sound rich and warm. "You are thanking me for the best decision I ever made. I should be thanking you. Then we will thank each other and call it even, deal." They stayed on the porch long after dark, holding hands and watching their valley sleep, and Varian knew with absolute certainty that he would not trade this life for anything the world could offer. He had found his place, his purpose, his peace. He had found his home. And it had all started with an orc girl in his shed at dawn, sharpening his axe like she belonged there. Because she did. She always had.